Hi,
Great.
Alex.
Hi, Julia. Great seeing you.
Great seeing you. Do I admit what happened? I think I have to admit what happened because I
You
have
can
enough of
admit
a
what
sense
happened.
of dark
Yes.
humor. This is our second attempt to do this because apparently I can make a 5.5 hour movie, but I can't record a Zoom call. So Alex was kind enough to do this conversation with me. It's the filmmaker's nightmare. You do an entire conversation, and out of the best intentions, I wanted to look at Alex and not myself. And I made the Zoom call. So it's all Alex. So I could be looking at Alex. And then I realized I recorded it with, that's what it recorded. I didn't realize that's what Zoom does. If you hide yourself, don't hide yourself in the Zoom recording because you won't be on screen. So, Alex, thank you so much for doing this again.
You're very welcome. You're very
And
welcome.
I've forgotten everything we talked about, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, me too. So it doesn't matter. We can just talk about your wonderful film that really impressed me so much because the choices you made of how to follow your characters. Because it's the first time I really have seen since a long time a really good and dense observational documentary. Although your film is very long, it's over 5 hours?
In 23 minutes.
Yes. I must say really that I never felt the time. I was there all the time following your wonderful characters. And uh, when I saw it, I was really curious to talk to you and to understand more about how you did it because my work is for sure similar. My film collective on that is mainly following investigative journalists in Romania is very similar. And I was curious to hear from you how you managed to get access to these people because I know how sensitive newsrooms are, more so in a you know totalitarian regime, we can call it, like Russia. Uh, and please tell me a bit about how you got to the idea to follow this young female journalist, and how you could win their trust to be really there, and them trusting you that you're not infiltrated by the Russian Secret Service, as I was told that the journalists that I followed in the beginning thought that it's a really good trick by the states to infiltrate someone into the newsroom.
And there's plenty of infiltration that does happen, absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to say that like collective meant so much to me as I was filming. It was one of the films that I thought of, and just it meant to, before I thought of this film, it just meant so much to me as a viewer. It was one of those films that I saw and then told everyone, have you seen? Have you seen? It's just, a lot of films, you see them and you're like, okay, fine, that was good, but you don't spend time talking about it. But your film was one of those films that I wanted to talk to people about. I wanted to get other people to see. And that's for me kind of, it came up a lot for me as a point of reference in making the film when I thought of this. So yeah, I mean, in my case, so all the journalists I followed are out in the open as journalists. They're not secretly journalists. They're doing their work openly, being persecuted for it by Russia. I was very lucky that I had a friend, Anna Nemzer, who is credited as a co-director on the film. And she was a host at Russia's last remaining independent TV channel, which was also operating in the open in 2021, which is absolutely unimaginable now because right now they're all independent media and Russia has been shut down. There are independent journalists, but they're working anonymously. They're working underground. But 4 months before the full-scale war, it was still possible. They'd been kicked off of cable, but they were still operating online. They had a website. They had a beautiful studio that looked more like MTV back in the days than a news studio with hot pink neon. And my friend Anya had this show that she started in the summer of 21 that I thought was just amazing. It was a show called Who's Got the Power? And she was focusing on civil society members and people who were trying to do politics in a different way under authoritarianism, but trying to make this country better for people, whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's, people with HIV, the homeless population, doing something to kind of make this society better, or focusing on press freedom, focusing on political repression, and looking at people who were doing grassroots politics. And she was a friend, and I knew her from before. And so when I came up with the idea, which really happened fast, because in the summer of 21, what happened was Russia started declaring journalists foreign agents, and not just media, but like independent journalists. So it would be like you'd be named Alex, source of mass media foreign agent. I'd be Julia, source of mass media foreign agent. And for example, at the start of this conversation, we'd have to say this. We'd have to have a disclaimer in all caps saying this is made by a foreign agent. If we were talking, you'd introduce me, you'd have to say, this is Julia, a foreign agent, because if you didn't, you'd get a fine and then another fine, and then you'd go to jail. And so, but this had just started. Like right now, there's hundreds of foreign agents. When it started, there were 25 when we started the film. It was so new. And so when it started happening, I mean, I read a story in the New York Times that said like Russian journalists being named foreign agents fighting back with humor. I should also mention, probably it's important, I keep forgetting this, I'm from Russia, but I came to the US as a little kid when I was 9. I speak Russian to my mom, but obviously I never lived in Russia proper as Russia. I was a citizen of the Soviet Union, and then that citizenship was taken away when we left. So Anya immediately, when I called her, she's like, yes, something's happening. Something dark is in the air. Journalists are having to mark themselves as others. This is a story. Let's try to make a film about this. But because, it's a small community of independent journalists, she knew everyone. Like even if she wasn't friends with them, it's really like 1 degree of separation. So I was coming in on the tail of this very trusted person. So it was really easy, remarkably easy. I think what also helped is because this was starting, there was a lot of media doing stuff around them, like Deutsche Welle, Arte. Everyone was showing up doing like a little short journalism piece about like journalists being named foreign agents. And suddenly all these, and it turned out being all women, were like, wait a minute, we've gone from being the people telling the story, suddenly we're the story, which is
Mm.
really weird for them. They were like, and they were almost, I was joking that a couple of them, because there were only so few foreign agents and they were getting all the interviews at the beginning. And they were like the stars of foreign agencies, So they were like, oh, here's one more girl and she wants to do something. And they joked, they're like, we had no idea you were going to stay with us for 4 years. And it was very different, of course. Immediately there was this moment, I think, with Ira, one of the characters, and it was one of the most meaningful moments to me when I started shooting. She said, I'm so tired of, people showing up and just like doing some short news report on me. And with you, I feel different. And to me, and this was like the second time we met, and she's like, it just feels different with you. And for me, that was a kind of trust and a connection that meant it gave me the confidence to keep going. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm making people feel comfortable with me. So I just went with that. It was nice. It was somehow like, and in the film, what's strange is you actually see, like, you see the first time I meet most of them except Anya. You
Yeah.
literally, like, I film from the door. Like, I just walk in filming. And so it's like you're meeting the characters with me. But almost immediately, there was just a connection and a rapport. I think one thing I did that helped with the trust is it's a really unusual situation because the risk was developing. Like we didn't know what was happening. We had absolutely no idea what would happen. And it was a moving target. And so I said to all of them, and I said it verbally, we didn't sign a contract until like my lawyer asked for it 2 years later. I said, I promise you that you will look at every single thing and get to check it for factual accuracy, but also for any risk that it may pose to the safety of you or your loved ones, and you will have a chance. And I think that made people feel comfortable um, because they could relax. They knew they could take it back. I mean, we joked like you can't say I said something stupid or I don't like my hair. It has to be like for good reason. And all of them were really amazing because they were professional journalists. I don't think once nobody ever asked me to take out anything that was because they just thought they didn't say it right or they didn't like it. Literally, the only things we took out had to do with protecting family.
Yeah.
or protecting, there were changes we made when the film was cut that were about like people who might have been happy to be filmed, at the time, but it didn't matter for me. Like, it didn't matter consent at the time of filming because Russia was a different place when I was editing the film than when I was filming it. And so I had to go back when the film was like literally like the fine cut and got every single person to sign off. And I also felt like, sorry, I'm giving a long answer, but it's one of the things that I feel like is most important to me, is having that trust, but also honoring that trust because it was working with a community. And I knew if I screwed up, if I like didn't do right by one person in that
Mhm.
community, suddenly there'd be 100 people, that I'd violated their trust because they all know each other or they know someone who knows each other. And so the other thing we did is I actually went back and I got a former TV Rain producer and we looked together, like I cut little video clips of every single person who appears in the background. Like, for example, people who are off screen or like not on camera usually, like a sound recordist, a makeup artist, and maybe they're sitting in a desk, at TV Rain, like right, for a split second, they're half blurry, but I literally sent them their like 2 seconds of fame in the background and said, "Are you okay with this? Will you sign a release when it's finished, or do you want to be blurred?" And we did blur some people who I think it's their right because right now, TV Rain is an undesirable organization. Just working for them is a criminal offense. So I wanted to people take their own risks. Everyone has their own relationship to risks, but I feel like that's the subject's decision, not mine.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that there are
Oops,
two
I'm not
things to
hearing
it
you.
because
Alex,
sorry,
I'm not hearing you.
you don't hear me? Oh, no. You can't hear me?
Now I can.
Okay, good. So I think that, there are two things to it because I've seen documentaries about TV Rain before, right? But nothing comes close to what you have done. Uh, and what I mean by that is that there's a total difference between documentaries and cinema, right? And I always aim for cinema. I don't think the documentary should be um, mixed with some kind of sexed up visual reportages, right? And in order to achieve something like what you have achieved, I think that the relationship to the characters is basically the most important thing, because for me in observational cinema, the film is born basically out of the relationship. You know, whatever enters the lens and becomes also for the viewer cinematic in terms of how we relate to characters, how characters open up, how their pace basically informs the form of the film and the pace of the film and the emotion of the film. This all basically is born from the relationship that a director is or a storyteller is able to form with the characters, and that's so beautiful with your film. And I think that that makes it also um just passed by so fast in during the long time it runs, right? Because you are there with the characters and the characters really open up and trust you fully, and you as a filmmaker really found the perfect way to translate basically the words, right? And I think that's seeing such a story out of Russia. It feels a bit like, because when I watched it, I had to think about all the great young people I met in Romania. Because as I emigrated as a child from Romania, and when I came back and saw how many young people, mostly journalists and people in the civil society, are really fighting for their dream of a modern society, of a liberal society, of democracy, that many times I thought that the young people that I found in Romania that are fighting for their society understand so much more what democracy really means than the people I knew from Germany, where I lived for such a long time. Because people tend to forget, right? When you live in a democracy, you tend to forget why you have laws, why you have moral values, and why you have to protect what you have, right? And that was so heartbreaking for me to see this young women that are really giving everything. They give their life basically, for this hope that they can change Russian society. They can impact it in a positive way, right? And then you see it all crumbling, like in with the speed of that invasion. Basically, Russia went from maybe there's a chance to the door is closed for the next decades in Russian, right? And that was heartbreaking. How was that for you? Because we experienced it basically live, as it happened. You had to go through this. And how did it inform the way, for example, how you thought about what kind of a film it would be? Because I know there are times, when you make a film that suddenly, you feel what the film will be. You feel what you're doing, and then you just flow with it. You don't think a lot anymore, right?
No, absolutely. And I mean, it's much easier to do good political work in a nice country. Obviously, that's easy, to be fighting the good fight in a good country. Although then suddenly things, I'm experiencing now in the US where a lot of what you're talking about, where you go into shock because we're used to taking a lot of things for granted. And for most of these people, there's one scene in the film where one of the characters says, "Look, I was in first grade when Putin came to power, as long as she says it really beautifully. She says, as long as I've known there was such a thing as a president, because, when you're 5, you don't really know what a president is, or you don't think about what is this president.
Mm.
Um, which is as long as I've known there was such a thing as a president, it's been Putin. Now, of course, it was briefly Medvedev, but I don't think that really counts.
Yeah. No.
There was, a momentary switch of places, but, most of them have grown up. They were babies, that's all they've ever known is life under Putin. And she says, like, he's this thing that's always there, like unimaginable, like it's just eternal Putin. And, to grow up under that and to decide that you're still going to fight and you're still going to oppose this. And, you live in a society where most people are, pretty fine with what's going on, and you keep fighting it, and and knowing that you probably won't win the fight. And I think that's really beautiful. And there's still people, I think, even now. I mean, obviously, Russia today is completely different than it was in 21. I mean, it's a part of a continuum, but there's still people who are resisting and who dream of a different way and a more humane society and wish this war would end and wish Russia would be, held responsible for the war crimes it's committed. There are those people. And, one thing, of course, we get is Ukrainians will criticize those people because they're the easiest to criticize as the people who are closest. It's understandable. Russia has caused so much suffering in Ukraine that it's understandable. But it's not so easy to, fight for good things in a bad country, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, I think that, not that there would not have been enough signs of the fact that the American society is losing it right now. But with the invasion of Venezuela, we can see, that the transformation of America into imperialist society, lawless society, is happening faster than we all have hoped, basically, not to
No,
happen.
absolutely. It's changed between the conversation we had before, our take 1 and take 2, is that, it used to be just chapters 1 through 3 that were becoming more relevant. You know, I didn't expect the chapter, but, chapters 4, 5 about like the special military operation, that suddenly
Yeah.
we're having our own special military operation. To suddenly, I was like, okay, I mean,
Yeah, and
that's
that's why I think
yeah,
that
it's new
that's
stuff.
why I really think that, your film is so important now for the States, maybe more than for Russia, because we know what Russia is. Uh, but I think it really shows where America will go, even though many people don't believe it. But, once you have an administration that behaves as imperialistic like this one, you know that the next step will be to really openly not only harass journalists on social media, but really closed down, basically, news and closed down transparent news and reporting, right? Uh, and I really think that, seeing your film and thinking about America now, for me, your characters right now are not only Russian, right? They and they are American somehow, right? They are westernized. They basically lived by all the values that the free Western world basically should represent, right? And so I really think your film is an American film right now. Is about America, maybe
Yeah,
more
that's
than
how it's
about
been
Russia.
right. That's how it's been written about. Definitely, it changed because it premiered at the New York Film Festival a few months before the Trump inauguration, and then it completely transformed how people thought about it because then it still felt like a film about, Russia far away over there. And now all the American critics are writing, this is about us. To the extent that one of the characters, Ksusha, said, wait, can it be about us first and then about you? You know? But it was just kind of a joke, but it's true. It is very much. And I think that's also something people notice in the film. Obviously, what you said now is it's not a Russia that feels, so often we see films from Russia and Russia feels very, far away over there, Russia. It's snowy. It's kind of very other. But these are characters, they're constantly talking, they refer to Gossip Girl, Emily, they watch Emily in Paris, they're constantly talking about Harry Potter. They believe in queer rights, they believe in all the good things, they hold very similar values. They look like people you might meet in New York or Berlin. And they lived at this time. Now, of course, they all fled into exile in a country that, was an authoritarian country and that seemed to us, of course, in America, very alien and different, and now is seeming incredibly familiar too.
Yeah,
And I think it's important to mention, just what you said about shutting down journalism. Russia didn't start by shutting down journalism and jailing journalists. It started, by suing them, with economic pressure, by making it impossible, like rain got pulled off cable. Then, advertisers left. Then they would threaten to sue anyone for libel, and slander. So it's really when we see what's happening in the US now with the pressures like 60 Minutes pulling a segment, all the lawsuits that Trump has with media, it all looks, I mean, the Anya in the film, one of the characters says, Putin loves this phrase. It's all within the framework of the law.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, no, but, and tell me, I was so curious because I know about a lot of documentary filmmakers, Russian documentary filmmakers that had to flee basically when the invasion happened, because yeah, they were undesirable and anything could have happened to them and their families, and they live now abroad. And I really had many times I thought like maybe there would be a good film in following these people in exile, and I was so curious to know what happened to your characters in exile and if they could go on working and how they deal humanly with being removed basically from their own country and um yeah, hoping or not that they can still return sometime, back home.
So, in case 5.5 hours of this film wasn't enough, there is a 5-hour part two coming where it is actually My Undesirable Friends Part Two Exile. I think, I'm going to be honest about it. You know, the war is horrible. Everything happening in the world is horrible. But I also understand that as a filmmaker, I got incredibly lucky because I started filming this film before anybody knew. I mean, I think the CIA suspected, and was trying to tell Zelensky, but everyone was like, it's not really going to happen. Before anybody knew there would be a full scale war of the kind we're seeing now for an unimaginable 4 years. And so by the time the war happened, I was following these characters for 4 months and we got to know them. And I think one thing I wanted to mention when you said about how I filmed the relationship with characters, I think it's maybe important that I come from fiction. I mean, I've made one other
Mhm.
documentary film, but I realize I film them. It's my instinct to film characters, to film faces, to film in close up, to film emotion. And so I film them, I think, probably as I would an actor giving the best performance of their life,
Yes.
except there's no take two and I have no idea what happens next, you know? So I just will fixate on a face. And so we know them emotionally the way you do in a fiction film. But then, so part one ends right when everybody, like within that 1 week, like I'm sure the filmmakers you knew probably left in that 1 week too. 1 million people left. And
Yeah.
everybody will say, like, everybody knows they're like, I left March 2nd. I left March 3rd. I left,
No,
everyone,
it was in that week. It was in
it's
that
in
week.
that week. And everyone will, it's like somehow it's because things were happening so fast in their head. Like you meet someone and you're like, oh, what day did you leave? And they're like, I left February, 28th and I left March 2nd. It's literally between February 24th and, usually March 4th, 5th that everyone just was out. And then
Mm.
more people, of course, left when there was a draft. But
Let's hope. Let's hope that people will be vigilant enough in the States, and we won't have this
it
discussion
won't,
about
we won't
the
leave.
certain months and day that American journalists left.
Yes, I hope that will not happen. But so when they were leaving, literally, I left with them. Like I stayed one more day. I uploaded all my footage because I was terrified that it would get, I was sitting there and like on a hotel Wi-Fi, very, very slow. We know hotel Wi-Fi. I mean, that's right. Uploading like 2 days of footage because all as I was filming, like people were leaving the country and I was buying up like drives with cash at Moscow stores because my credit card was no longer working there because they'd been cut off from Swift, sending them out with other people that I knew who were leaving. Like, and then I uploaded the footage one day and then I met them in Istanbul the next day. So part two starts 2 days later. And I think, again, I just got incredibly lucky. So it's this whole part of where you're starting from the very first days of exile, where, one of the girls says, yes, I mean, she's 22. She says, yesterday I was an anchor on TV Rain. I had a boyfriend, an apartment, I had a life, and now I'm some loser in Istanbul. And it is that immediate experience of exile. They don't know where they're going. They have no idea. They have no jobs. Their media have been shut down. Meanwhile, their country is going through the biggest news story of their entire lives. And so they have to get back to reporting on it, but they don't have media. So they first start like YouTube channels, then they get Rain back up on their feet. Um, Two of the girls do still, their media still exists because their editor had only because they got so lucky that their editor was basically threatened with arrest and had to leave a few months before. So he set up a base in Prague. Um, and everyone's completely lost, and then they try to get back up on their feet, and now all of them are, of course, working as journalists, reporting the truth about the war, talking about Russian war crimes in Ukraine, um, telling the truth, to as many Russians as will listen, trying to counter propaganda, hoping to reach anyone in Russia, but also doing this year after year for a country that they no, they likely won't be able to go back to for decades. Some of them have been named extremists and terrorists. Some of them have been arrested in absentia. Nobody can go back because, they know they would just go to jail. So that means they can't go back if an elderly parent dies. It's just, you can't go. And so that's what part two is kind of, but again, it's, the luck that I had was that you're following characters you already knew before. So you knew them
Mm.
like 4 months before, when they had no idea they were going to have to leave their country. And you get to, obviously, there have been a lot of different populations that have gone through exile, sudden exile, but just getting to live through it live with the characters, that like, because I do think they kind of become a little bit your friends. At
Yeah,
least that's
more than that,
how
maybe. Yeah, yeah,
people feel like they kind of, you follow them the way you would in, I don't know, a reality show or a fiction series, them.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I'm very curious to see the the second part. But I must tell you, I think your film is really a very rare cinematic achievement, and I really hope that it will advance as deserved, because that will raise basically the outreach of your film.
I just hope it gets seen. I think, I made some crazy choices. I thought that, obviously I had pressure at the beginning. People said, oh, well, you make it into a normal film. And I said, you know what? it kind of goes back to the question you asked, about how do you know what the film needs to be or what kind of film it is. I just said I need to spend time with this footage and it will tell me what the film is.
Yeah.
That's what will tell you. And so I just said, okay, we're just going to make it how we think it should be made. It's a little crazy to make this kind of what will be two different films adding up to 10 hours, but
Yeah, but I
that's
think that's the right form. I think you took the right decision because that's the right form for the film, and that's how it will basically, uh, I don't know if survive is the name, but that's how it will, build its legacy somehow because, um, the time is needed for this story to be told, basically.
wrong. Thank you so much, Alex, for doing
Thank
this and
you
for
for this
joining
film.
me again. And it's just, like I said, your work meant so much to me as I was making it. And it was one of the films I felt connected to. So it's just such a
Thanks.
honor and pleasure to talk to you.
I'm
Thank you for sharing.
I'm I'm very happy to hear that it could be inspiring in some way. Yeah.
Thank you.